Welcome to part 2 of the rendering module. In this section we are going to cover how to apply decals. We're going to adjust the environment settings, and then we're going to start doing a rendering with the rapid ray tracer, and then we're going to move on to how to create a rendering using the A360 cloud renderer. The last thing I want to do before I start looking at actually doing a rendering of this is I want to apply a decal to it. So what you need to do in this case is in your module dataset there is this Autodesk logo, and you need to download it onto your desktop and then apply it as a decal. So I'm going to click on here and open up the details in the Fusion 360 data panel here. So here we're in A360 and automatically comes up and I have the option here to download this image file. So I'm going to download that image file. So here it is, now downloaded. I'm going to close this again, and I'm going to close my data panel, and I'm going to go into the decal tool. So what the decal tool does is basically, like it states, it's a sticker or a decal that gets placed on a surface. So in order to do this, it needs a face that I need to apply to. So I'm going to click on the side of this handle because that's where I'm going to apply it to. I really want it to be somewhere down in here, and I'm going to select an image. And it gives me an area here, and then my downloads I have this Autodesk logo, so I'm going to open that up, and you can see we get a widget here that's very similar to what you use to move geometry in the scene, except that this one's applied to this face. So I can grab this handle and rotate it until I get it where I want it. I can use this to move it along that surface, and I can scale it so that it's the right size, and I'm really just going to eyeball this here to get it into the right spot. And then I can do fine tweaking here. So just because I get in here and I say, oh, I don't, this is not where I want it to be, or I need to be a little bit more, a little bit less, I can change the things here. But I think that's okay. So I'm going to say okay. And there we have my utility knife with the right materials assigned to it, has a decal on the side, it's ready to be rendered. The next thing I need to do is change the environment. So this is in a default environment right now, and I'm going to click on the environment button and bring up the environment dialog box. Now an environment is basically a large dome that this object is sitting in, and on that dome is a high dynamic range image, or HDRI, that has information on black and white and tones and light information. So we don't have individual lights in Fusion when you're doing rendering. It takes all that information from the environment map that's being applied. And in here, in the environment section, the style refers to the type of map that you want to use in the scene. So right now we're on sharp highlights, and there's a number of different choices, and as you move through the different choices, you can see how that affects the scene. So a cool light gives you a little bit different look, and you can see this is more projected downwards, and you get the shadow right underneath. Warm light is similar, except it adds a warm light, different color light in the scene, a soft light, and a grid light. So there's a number of different lights to choose from, and then we have two other ones which are actually environment maps that are done with a special kind of camera. They're put outside, and it does a 360-degree capture at a high dynamic range image. And we have two of them by default in here. Plaza, which is a scene, and you can sort of see in the surface here how it's reflecting in that surface. And the other one is Snowfield, which is sort of just a lot of snow in the sky. So those are your two other choices. If you want an outdoor reflection, some things look a little bit better if you want them to reflect, especially a highly, like a chrome, something that's highly reflective sometimes looks nicer if you put it into a natural scene rather than putting it just in a studio, because you get much more exciting sort of reflections on that surface. In this case, I'm kind of happy with sharp highlights, the way it's set up right now. So I'm going to leave it at that. Now exposure allows me to change how bright and how dark the lights are, so I'm going to just touch those down a little bit. And rotation actually rotates the image inside the dome. And so what you can see is how, as I rotate it, that the shadow is moving almost like the sun moving along the sky, and it's changing the location of the shadow, and it's changing the type of reflection I'm getting and where most of the light is hitting. And I sort of want the light to hit on the front side of this here, And I like this highlight that's moving across on the surface. It highlights all these texture maps. I think that's where I want it to be. And in your background color, you have two choices. There's a default set of colors based on which of these styles you choose. If I want it to just be a white color, I can click to edit this. It can be white. I can change it to whatever color I want, really. And if there's a color that's more complementary to the body you're using and you want something a little bit more artistic, you can do that. I'm going to leave it white for now. I think it looks nice with white. And down in effects, I can change whether I'm showing a ground shadow or not, and whether I'm showing a reflection. So you can see there's a slight reflection on the surface. So that's my environment map, and I'm happy with the way that's set up. And now I'm ready to actually get into rendering. So in rendering in Fusion 360, we have two basic types of renderers that you see on a regular basis when you're using the software. The first one is your graphics processing rendering, which is called GPU, which is what you're looking at right now. And that's basically what you look at when you're in any of these workspaces and model. That's what is used to show you the surfaces. And the reason we use that here is because it's really lightweight. It doesn't take a lot of calculation. It's using your graphics card, so it's very fast. So similar to how video games work today, the graphics card is strong enough to project all this information on your surface. It doesn't look 100% photorealistic, but it doesn't really have to for what you're doing when you're doing modeling. So it's good for setting up your scene and working in there. The other type of render we have is the ray tracer. So the ray tracer is special software that's used to create photorealistic images, and it uses ray passes, basically follows the light information and looks at how light is hitting a surface and whether that surface is reflective and how it would reflect off another surface, and it grabs information based on this projection of light on the surface. And it basically tries to simulate the natural flow of light in your scene using something called global illumination. And so if I turn this on, what you'll see right away is that your surface the rapid ray tracer kicks in right away and starts to render your surface. And I've got this on a high quality right now. That's why the image looks kind of noisy. It looks like it's filtering. So I can go down into the quick quality, and that renders very quickly. This is just a quick approximation. It's almost the same as your GPU. The difference is that really it's using this ray tracing engine. It's not using the GPU engine. So it gives you a little bit of a more idea of what's going to go on in your scene, but everything is being sort of calculated really quickly. It doesn't do a very good job on shadows. They're not accurate shadows. It doesn't do anything with your global illumination. That's why the inside of this looks bad. So if you want to get something a little bit more realistic, normal, we'll do a render fairly quickly. It's not 100% accurate or photoreal, but it's something that's a little bit more accurate. You can see the inside here is much better. But for something that you want to be photorealistic, you really need to use advanced. So advanced uses all the global illumination. It follows accurate simulation of direct and indirect light in order to give you a realistic image. Now the trade-off here is that you have to wait for a while for this to figure out. And so this is not a software render that you start and then leave it. This one that keeps rendering as you sit here and watch. And this elapsed time tells you how long it's been rendering and the number of iterations and the number of passes it's made in order to create this this image. You can pause it, and it will stop the renderer for a little bit, and then you can say continue. But because this is a real-time ray tracer, if I move this object, you can see it stops rendering it until I stop moving around, and then it starts to recalculate again. So what we really want to do is set it up in an area that you're happy with the layout, and the easiest way to do that is in probably quick, because it comes back really quickly. Set up in your scene. Move this out of the way here, and then you want to say go to advanced. Now, how long you leave this is really dependent on how high quality image you're looking for. For something that's done in advanced iterations, you could leave it for anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 iterations to get a really good image. And again, it really depends, and it's up to you to decide where you're happy with the image. But you can see sort of here in the center, it's figuring out a lot of the things in the middle. So it's going to take a while for that to clean up properly and figure out the reflections, as well as the reflection here and the shadow information here. So that is how you do a ray trace. And I can, as I said, I can disable the ray trace or I can pause the ray trace. But basically, when I'm in this mode, I have to leave it and let it do its job, and it's going to go through and render it until I get to a point where I'm ready to take an image of it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to leave this long so that you have to sit here and watch this. I'm going to pause this here, and I'm going to go to capture image. And what capture image does is it takes the information based on your screen, so it's 1600 by 699, and it allows me to create an image there. So I'm going to say OK. It's going to allow me to save a name for this, so I'll call it render 1. And it's going to go in my downloads folder, and it's going to be a PNG file. So I'm going to save that, and that's going to save down in my downloads. And if I go into my downloads, there's Knife Render 1, so there's the image I created. And again, I didn't leave this long enough to give a really high quality image, but you get the idea of how you can create images this way. Now the thing about the Rapid Ray Tracer is the Rapid Ray Tracer really can only go the maximum resolution of your screen. So if you want something that's a really high resolution or a high number of pixels, probably the best bet would be use the A360 renderer, and I'll show you how we do that in a minute. So I'm going to close this now. It's thinking about something. Not sure what it's thinking about. And we're stuck. So what I'm going to do is this is saved, and what happens in the software automatically is, as you know, is there's an automatic version save that happens based on what you set in your preferences, or you can click on the save button and it will save this information. Every time you do a version save or do a manual save, the A360 rendering, cloud rendering engine does a little thumbnail version of those based on these windows. So in here you have a number of preset name views. You have top, front, right, and home. And what you can do is create your own name view, and that name view will determine the image that you want to create. So I can orientate this so that so it's oriented in a way that I'm happy with the render, with the way that my composition will look. And I'm going to delete this one and create a new one. I'm going to say new named view. So what that does is it creates a different name view, and I'm going to call this render. So I know that that's the one I want for the image. I'm going to save that. Now it's going to save all this information in the file. So it has all the materials assigned. It knows I want to use this render view. And I'll show you where you can find this information in the cloud renderer. So the cloud renderer is basically a rendering engine similar to the one we have on the desktop. The difference is that one runs using the cloud resources. So it can be quite quick because it's using multiple resources to create the image. And it doesn't take time off of your desktop. So you can go into, you can see now I have an updated version of my thumbnail here that has the materials applied. I'm going to close this and open it here and go to Open Details in A360. So this will open up the browser and bring me into A360. And by default, when we open up, we go into this 3D viewer, which is a web viewer that allows you to see the model in 3D. Now because it's just saved, it's updating the information. And then down here we have pre-rendered thumbnails. So it's going to acquire those renderings. And here we have a number of different versions rendered. So this was the version that was rendered when we first started because it only had the default physical materials assigned. But I can go in here and it is now doing version 36. And it will allow you to see all the different preview versions. So here's 36. You can see they're now starting to kick off and render. Now this will change depending on how many, how much activity there is in the rendering queue. But you can see here some previous versions. So here's a previous version that saved before, and I have front, the render, so that's that render window that I created, top, right, and home. And you can click on these, and when you click on them you get that larger view of that same image. And under actions you can say re-render using new settings. So if you can download this image, so if you like this image I can download it. Again, it goes into my downloads folder. I can adjust the exposure on it, so if I want to change the exposure, I can do that here. But pretty much the other thing I can do is go into re-render, and allows me to use change the aspect ratio, and I can change how large the image is, the final quality, and under custom I can change the number of different things in here. So there are some other options for you to try using the A360 render. The only thing you have to keep in mind that does use cloud credits. So if you're doing re-rendering, you are going to need to use some of your cloud credits to do some of the larger images if you want to create them. So with that brings me to the end of the rendering module. I hope that you have learned what you needed to know about creating your own images, and I look forward to seeing some of your artwork in the gallery.